Hi, everyone. My name is Spencer Brown. I am Marketing Support Analyst at Dickinson and Associates, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar on SAP S/4HANA. I would like to thank you all for joining. Also point out that if any questions arise in the webinar, you can ask them via the Q&A button within the Zoom application. We'll answer questions toward the end of the webinar, and if there are questions we don't get to, we will follow up directly with you after the presentation to cover those questions. Next slide, please. I am honored to introduce our two speakers for today, so buckle up, friends. The first speaker you will be hearing from is our own Brad Hickett, VP of Client Engagement and SAP S/4HANA Move, and then you will also be hearing from Alex Boralkov, Director of Client Engagement and SAP S/4HANA Move. And with that, I'll hand things over to Brad. Take it away, Brad.
Thank you, Spencer. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at the process of moving from SAP ECC to S/4HANA. So we will take a dive into some of the particular tools and areas of specific need in doing such a conversion. So to look at that specifically, we will first introduce an approach for a brownfield conversion from ECC to SAP S/4HANA. Some critical and mandatory tools that have to be utilized as part of a conversion is the SAP Readiness Check, the SAP Maintenance Planner, the Customer Vendor Integration for Business Partner, and Custom Code Remediation. So within this group, we're going to cover really from the inception of a project in preparation through looking at the basis tool of the maintenance planner, the functional tool with CVI, and a technical tool within the technical ABAP analysis. So first, let's take a look at the typical methodology that we would use as part of a SAP ECC to S/4HANA conversion. There are actually three different ways in which you can move from SAP ECC to S/4HANA. I'm going to work from the bottom up on this slide. The first one is to do a new implementation, do a re-implementation, if you will. So use your existing SAP ECC system as a legacy system, configure a new S/4HANA system, extract data, load data, and actually do a conversion, probably like most of you did in your initial SAP implementations. The reason for that is it allows you to get rid of old setups that you're not particularly fond of, change business processes, but it tends to be a larger effort than some of the other types of projects. A selective data transition is the second option, which does allow you to establish a new S/4HANA environment and still use your ECC system as a legacy, but it actually does a selective move of information. So you don't necessarily bring over all of the information that you had in your ECC system, and you're able to enrich the data as you move it. Today, however, we're going to focus on a brownfield implementation, which most people still think of as an upgrade. However, it really is not an upgrade. It is technically what we call a conversion. You are changing many elements as part of an S/4HANA conversion. So the application, the code set, changes from the ECC code set to the S/4HANA code set. You're probably changing databases. Most ECC environments run on a third-party application. With S/4HANA, you will run on the HANA database. And you're probably even doing a hardware change in the process because of the computing power needed. So let's dive into the actual methodology. So we follow the standard SAP provided methodology because, quite frankly, it's very effective for doing these types of projects. So we start with a discover phase, and we'll dive into one of the tools that's utilized during the discover phase, the readiness check. This is really the process of collecting enough information so that we can estimate what your project's going to look like, if you will, how big is the breadbox. From there, once we've established what that project will look like, then we'll move into the prepare phase, where we're running a variety of SAP tools, including the maintenance planner as one of those, and moving into the explore phase, where we start to do things like the functional preparations for customer vendor integration and custom code analysis and what remediation needs to occur. Once we have that baseline established and have all of that information, then we move into a realize phase, where we're actually executing a conversion process. You still use the SAP Update Manager, the SUM tool that many of you may be familiar with. And we will probably utilize the conversion process multiple times. We recommend actually going through 2 rehearsals, or some people think of them as sandboxes, but we recommend exercising the upgrade process, the conversion process twice before actually moving on to your development environment. There are multiple approaches to the conversion for your development box. It could be converted, or there's actually ways to create it based on one of the rehearsal systems. Then we actually recommend you move to your production environment. So move from dev to the production environment and actually recreate quality from a copy of production, which is a fairly standard process in ECC environments. And it usually shortens the timeline of the conversion project. Okay, so let's take a dive into some of the tools that we would utilize in this process. We're first going to look at the SAP Readiness Check. So, as I said, the readiness check is actually typically executed during the discover phase. It's giving us the baseline information that we need to know about your environment. So it's looking at things like, what add-ons do you have in your system? It's giving us a lot of technical details about your system. An important thing to know about the SAP Readiness Check is you will probably run it multiple times throughout a project. So we not only use it to discover and collect information for building the initial project timeline and resource estimate, but we use it to validate that corrections have been completed. So it's a tool that can be run multiple times. It's once you have the system set up to run the readiness check, it's a very easy tool to run and provides very valuable information. So let's take a deeper dive into it. So as I said, it's a tool that is really meant to collect information from your environment, and it will help us understand the process of converting and your ECC system to S/4HANA. So one of the primary things that the readiness check does is it looks at what SAP calls simplifications. Simplifications are fundamentally a delta between ECC and S/4HANA. So if you think about what S/4HANA was built upon, it's a simplified database. There's changes to the data structure. It's a simplified set of transactional codes. So the T codes actually, some T codes have gone away. So what SAP is doing is analyzing your ECC environment and how you've utilized it in the past and comparing it to simplifications that you may need to consider in the future. Customer vendor integration to business partner is a simplification. It's a change in the data model, a simplified data model. So the SAP Readiness Check will do an analysis on that. There's other things that analyzes as well. So it will look at things like business functions that you have turned on in your system. Within the SAP Switch framework, you can activate certain pieces of functionality. Those are called business functions, and it will examine whether you have certain business functions turned on and whether they're compatible to S4. Some of those may have been incorporated into standard SAP S4HANA. The analysis will tell us if there's any actions we have to take related to business functions. It will also give you information as to what Fiori applications might be useful to you. So it's going to look at your transactional usage, determine what transactions you frequently use, and recommend the apps that would make sense for you. There's a number of other things that are analyzed, like sizing, a variety of technical objects. It looks at custom code and determines what volumes of Z code you have, so we can estimate what the impact might be for code remediation. So it's a very powerful tool. To be able to run the readiness check, however, there are some prerequisites. There are some steps that you have to take, and some of those are implementing various OSS notes. These are just a small sampling. There's probably about 10 to 12 notes that you actually have to consider as to whether or not those are needed for your environment. But there is a primary note for setting up the readiness check and enabling the simplification item check. Those two are mandatory OSS notes that have to be applied on your system to run the readiness check. Whether or not you want to look at the business partner CVI conversion, there's a note that describes the process for that. That's not a mandatory step, but it should be considered. And likewise with the custom code analysis. So be aware that there are preparatory steps. There's also prerequisites on the technical side. So certain levels that you have to be at within your SAP environment. So for example, you have to have S-Note capability. So you want backbone connectivity or the ability to have that S-Note downloads, because OSS notes will have to be applied during the process. And then based on your basis version, you need to be at a specific release level. So the table on the right-hand side of the slide shows for a particular basis version what service pack release level you have to be at. There are also tools that need to be enabled on your system. They're really the tools that are collecting a lot of the technical information, and those must also be at a minimum level. So to execute the readiness check, once we have it on your system, it's really just a matter of going to SA38 and executing a program that will then exist on your system, RC collect analysis data. And as you run that tool, you'll be provided options for the analysis that you want to conduct. So you see a series of checkbox here. Do we want to look at interfaces? Do we want to look at data volumes? Do we want to look at business partners? So you make certain choices, and you also tell it what version is your target. So it will determine where you're coming from. You have to tell it where it is you'd like to go to. So the analysis can be run for different SAP S/4HANA versions. You could do an analysis to say, should I go to 1809 or to 1909? Once that's been run, it actually generates a file that you simply just store somewhere on your server, your network, so that it can be uploaded to an SAP portal for analysis. Then you go to the readiness check, which is an SAP portal, and you actually click the button here in the center that says Start New Analysis, and it will ask you to upload in the file that has been created. So it's really collecting a series of XML files that were generated by the readiness check report, and it will conduct an analysis on those. As that process is running, you can actually see in the portal that it is in preparation, that the analysis is being created and it's in preparation. But eventually, and it's really a relatively quick process depending on the size of your environment, it can complete in a matter of minutes. It will eventually come back and say ready. And then you'll be able to click on the name that you gave to the analysis and see the details. The details are presented in the SAP Readiness Check portal. So here we see an analysis of simplification items and add-on compatibilities. These are actually interactive tiles, so you can click and drill into these tiles and get further detail, understand what simplifications it's talking about, understand what add-ons need to have consideration. And this is a scrollable portal. There's a number of different tiles that address things like the custom code and the CVI. Ultimately, however, you can download a copy of the document, so you can generate a Word document that also has a series of Excel documents that have the details of each of these tiles in it. It downloads as a zip file. You can store that, and then you can provide that to the folks within your team or the business partner that you're working with for your conversion. The report is a rather extensive one, so it is automatically generated, and it includes information such as add-on compatibility, custom code. The biggest part of the document will, however, be the simplifications. There's typically anywhere from 50 to 500 simplifications that might be pointed out on a particular SAP environment. So the readiness check really will help you determine what you need to do. Do you have incompatible add-ons? Do you have business functions that are activated that need to be addressed? Do you have OSS notes that have to be implemented to deal with the conversions? What custom code do you have that needs to be considered? And even what your forward-looking position should be on Fiori applications. So that's typically conducted in the discovery phase, repeated as we're in the prepare phase. But as we move into prepare, we'll start to run a second tool that does a very similar analysis, but it's really very technically focused. It's looking at the basis applications called the maintenance planner. So in the prepare phase, we're going to run this tool and get a deeper analysis, and it will tell you what are the blocks for you being able to conduct the upgrade. So it will literally tell you if there is going to be a hard error in the process. So let's look at the process of how the maintenance planner works first. So starting in the bottom left-hand corner, we see a customer system. We see an SAP landscape there. We will install a series of host agents on that system, which are collecting information. So those host agents are collecting informations that are then stored in the system landscape directory. You'll hear me refer to it as SLD. That SLD information is then uploaded or pushed to the landscape management database, which is part of your solution manager environment. And so with that, an analysis begins. Then ultimately that information, which can be enriched there, is pushed to the customer portal for an analysis. And then maintenance planner connects to that customer portal information and does the final analysis on the information. So let's kind of walk that process in a little bit deeper detail. So the first step, we've installed host agents and we want to collect the information and store it in the SLD. So you're going to run transaction code RZ70 and it will collect the information. So as you run RZ70, it's going to ask you what your host IP address is, what the gateway is, and then as you execute it, it's going to ask you if you want to conduct the analysis. As part of that analysis, it's going to run a series of programs in the background that are actually collecting a lot of information. Now, none of this information is your business information. We're not looking at financials. We're not looking at who your customers are or what your sales volumes are. This is very technically oriented in nature, looking at your landscape. Then ultimately, within Solution Manager, you will see that analysis show up as part of the SLD environment, and it can be pushed up to the landscape management database. So to do that, there is actually a tool within Solution Manager that will allow you to upload that. So looking at this graphic, and I realize it's a bit of an eye chart, we've taken it from an ECC system into SLD, and now we're pushing it to LMBD, the blue section here. And the information will show up as a technical system within the environment. So we're specifying the system that we're uploading here, what's the technical system, and ultimately an analysis of that information is done. So you have the ability to drill through this application and look at some of the details on the things. So for example, in the bottom right-hand corner, it's showing a series of add-ons that may need to be addressed. But from there, you're going to take that information and upload it to the SAP portal. So going to the customer portal within Solution Manager, there's a button in that transaction that is to upload it to the portal. It will upload it, and then within the customer portal for your customer number, you'll be able to see that that analysis has been uploaded and is ready to be analyzed. And then ultimately, the maintenance planner will do an analysis of that system. So here we're seeing an ABAP ERP system that's been uploaded. And it will do a guided procedure that walks you through the analysis. So in this case, we have synced the data. You see that sync is red, but we haven't really completed the analysis yet because we need to enrich the data. We need to do some things that verifies that information. So it actually takes us through a series of questions that we answer related to our gateway and our current use of things like Fiori, but it ultimately will come back and will verify the system saying that you have successfully provided the information necessary. From there, we can begin to run the maintenance planner itself to determine what our plan should be for moving forward. So you will again select the version that you're looking to convert to, and it will ultimately give you a analysis of your system. That analysis will include the roadblocks that you face in completing a S/4HANA conversion. So it'll come back with, here's add-ons that have to be considered. It will come back with things related to business functions that need to be considered. It will note simplifications that need to be addressed in OSS notes. So ultimately, it's helping you understand your roadblocks. So in the end, it's looking for what needs to be uninstalled or deactivated in your system, and what functional prerequisite steps may need to be completed. All right, so from the maintenance planner then, we're going to move on to customer vendor integration, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Alex Baralkov.
Thank you, Brad. And let's go on to the next slide here. Continuing with the conversion process, we now move into the functional prep, which includes a number of activities, but for today's purpose, we will focus on the customer vendor integration, which is the part of the logistics prep. Next slide. To start, let's understand the business partner concept in S4 and the difference to the ECC structure. Let's imagine a company with which you do business. You sell some products to this company, and you also buy some things from it. So in this case, it serves as a customer and a vendor. In ECC, shown on the left side, you would create two independent records, one for customer, one for vendor, and these will have some redundant data like addresses. With the use of the S/4HANA Business Partner, the same situation may look different. Here you create a business partner record which holds central shared data for the company and creates sub-records of customer and vendor, which only hold respective unique data for those objects. So this structure is shown on the right. In order to convert from ECC to S/4HANA, you must prepare your ECC data to fit the S/4HANA structures. This is what CVI is really all about. So let's take a look at a system example. Next slide. So what we're looking at is transaction VA03, which is a display sales order. On the left side, you see a screen from ECC. On the right side, you see a GUI screen for S/4HANA. In both these examples, we have a sold to party, which can display using the partner button highlighted. So let's see what happens if we click that button on both of these screens. Next slide. So in ECC on the left side, the navigation goes to the customer master transaction, as you are likely familiar with. In S4, the navigation takes us to the business partner transaction. We are looking at the customer role within a business partner. This business partner may also have other roles. The business partner is the leading transaction in this case. You'll notice that there are two numbers shown with the arrows, one for the business partner that's on the top, and the other one is for the customer, which is a little bit lower. In this example, they are the same. However, from a technical perspective, it is possible to set those to different number ranges. So this takes us to the next point. This is important as you need to consider if the business partner number should be the same as your customer partner number. Keeping them in sync reduces the business change impact on teams that deal with the customer number, like your customer service. However, the same logic also applies to vendors. Therefore, if you have an overlap between vendor and customer numbers, you'll need to determine which object wins. Let's say, for instance, that in our example, if you see on the ACC side, we have a customer 100920. If we had a vendor with number 100920 that represented a different unrelated entity, you would need to decide which of these records would get a matching business partner record number. Let's take a look at this more closely in subsequent slides. Next slide, please. Here's a definition slide really for your reference. The key things that I want to highlight here is that CVI is a prerequisite for the S/4HANA conversion, and that you'll need to define a strategy for the numbering concept. Also, on the bottom portion of this slide, I list the ECC transactions which are redirected to the business partner transaction, which is BP, and that's for HANA, and those that go away completely. Now let's dive into the CVI process. Next slide. This diagram represents the customer vendor integration conversion process for S/4HANA. It consists of 4 key phases listed on the top row: preparation, synchronization, conversion, and post-processing. The green line separates the activities in ECC and in S/4HANA. We will look at each one of them in turn, but first let's have a look at the high-level overview of the process. Next slide. There are a couple of animations on this slide, so Brad, I will guide you through that. Similar to our earlier diagram, you start with customer vendors in ECC. There are no business partners yet. Next animation. You must create the corresponding business partners in ECC with reference to customer and vendor. This process is called synchronization. Once completed, you have records in all 3 objects that are synchronized. Next animation. Then, once the technical conversion to S4 is complete, this structure is brought over. But here, the business partner becomes the leading object, meaning that all new customers and vendors originate from the business partner. For this to work, you need to adjust the synchronization process the opposite direction. Let's walk through this process step by step. Next slide. Okay, the preparation phase takes care of all the prerequisite activities to synchronize customers and vendors with the business partners. Here we perform any necessary cleanup activities, set up the configuration and mappings, and perform checks to ensure that we are ready for successful synchronization. Next slide. There are quite a few things to keep in mind. So first, we ensure that we have quality data in the customer and vendor objects. As for many projects, the data cleanup may be a significant endeavor and needs to be considered. We check 2 main criteria: scope and consistency. From scope perspective, we're looking for records to be meaningful. If there are obsolete records, we recommend to archive them and therefore avoid creating business partners for these. In CVI, even records with deletion flags must be replicated. The content of the records must contain meaningful information as well. We recommend ensuring that key replication fields are valid, for example, consistency of address stacks and payment data to avoid subsequent errors. Second, we set up the data replication, which are shown by the arrows in the diagram. We turn on the functions and tools necessary to perform its synchronization and any error resolution. We define number range rules, and we map out the customer vendor account groups with business partner groupings and roles. Finally, once all these pieces are in place, we perform a series of checks to ensure that all of our settings are complete and consistent. Let's take a look at some of these activities. Next slide, please. This is an example of business function activation. This is transaction SFW5. For CVI, we need 2 of these functions activated: CA supplier SOA and CABP SOA. Note that business function CABP SOA is not available before HP6, so in that case, it needs to be configured manually. Next slide. Here's a slide showing some customizing settings. There are quite a few customizing activities. For example, master data synchronization requires a series of activation steps like function modules, post-processing orders, synchronization options. Number ranges need to be mapped. I will show that an example on the next slide. There are quite a few series of value mapping activities for customers, vendors, and also contact persons for customers and vendors. You may navigate through all these customizing steps through IMG or utilize a transaction CVI_cockpit, which is shown here, which offers most of these steps in one place. Next slide. Okay, here's an example of a number range worksheet. On the left side, you'll notice the number ranges of customers, which are on top, a list customer, and vendors on the bottom. You see what's listed as a vendor. On the right, you see the ranges for business partners as a result of this analysis. This is the output. To make it simpler and avoid mistakes, I use an Excel formula to highlight number range overlaps. You'll notice the conflicts are identified by color and number. So the yellow range in customer conflicts with the yellow range in vendor, blue with blue, and so on. So we need to make a decision on those. You'll notice that in this example, the decision, which is represented by a center column, is for customer ranges to win the conflicts. So the result is that the business partners generated by customers would have the same number range. However, the vendors that have conflicts would generate the business partner in a new number range. In other words, in these cases, the vendor and business partner numbers would not be the same. Next slide. Once we have completed our preparation, we move into the synchronization phase. In this phase, we actually replicate the business partner records from customers and vendors. Next slide. Once we ensure data quality in our customer and vendor objects, activate the synchronization tools, and set the mapping rules, we create our business partner corresponding to vendors and customers. Synchronization is a process of replicating customer and vendor data into business partner data based on a set of rules. Once this synchronization is complete, it is also important to validate that all the records were created successfully and that consistency is established between all of these data objects. Next slide. Here are some tools that we use. The Synchronization Cockpit, which is shown on the top right, is the tool to execute the synchronization. You can execute this for various selection options, and also there's a test mode option. This allows you to verify and correct data before synchronizing. You can see in my example here that I executed some test runs which returned errors, which you see with the red traffic light, and required fixing before the actual load was successful. The pre-upgrade check report shown at the bottom left is used to check the customizing settings and correct and then check the results of the conversion. You'll notice that in my example, the customizing and the results are successful, but there's one red traffic light, which is BP, the customer vendor mapping is not yet complete. This step is needed only after the conversion, so I could proceed here. Next slide. Next comes the conversion phase. Here, there are no functional CVI steps. The conversion of ECC to S/4HANA follows the S/4HANA conversion guide. This process is executed by the technical team, and no functional activities and CVI are required. Next slide. After the conversion, we are now in the S/4HANA environment. Here, the business partner is the leading object. We now adjust the system to synchronize newly created or change business partners back to customer or vendor. Next slide. All of the previous steps were necessary to create the complete and consistent data structure of business partners, customers, and vendors. In S/4HANA, the customer and vendor data becomes sub-object of the business partner. If you recall the beginning of this section, we highlighted how the navigation behavior is different between ECC and S4. Before we set this live, we need to essentially reverse the synchronization logic with customizing steps that are very similar to those we used in preparation. Instead of customers and vendors replicating to business partner, now it's the other direction. Now the business partner will generate respective customer and vendor sub-records based on the selected BP roles. At this point, your CVI process is complete. And now I will turn this back to Brad to discuss the custom code preparation and remediation.
Thank you, Alex. All right, so the last object we want to examine is the code remediation that may need to occur and inevitably will need to occur between an ECC system and an S/4HANA system. This is typically done both in pre-steps and post-steps. So it's part of the explore phase, and it's actually part of the realization phase as well. So why do we need to do remediation? Simple fact of the matter is the syntax is different between ECC and S/4HANA. So we have to analyze existing code, both SAP standard code and custom code, to determine what, if any, changes need to occur. There are tools that SAP provides to do this, but ultimately you're doing a comparison against the simplification database, and there may be various OSS notes that can help guide you through the corrections that need to occur. The tool set itself is quite valuable in looking at the objects that need to change, and can even assist in making some of the corrections. So let's think about the code remediation process itself, because it is a bit of a big topic. So first, you want to get transparency to what custom code you have that may need to be touched. Part of this is simply just to determine, should we really spend the time to convert all of this code? Because there's a couple of reasons you may not want to. First and foremost, you may not use the code anymore. Many companies implemented in the late 90s and built code back then that today they just simply do not utilize any longer. So why take the time to correct and convert code that is no longer used? Second, there may be functionality within S/4HANA that provides the functionality that is provided by your current custom code. So for example, there are customers who have built customer portal type of views, custom transactions to look at multiple customer related objects at once. Within S/4HANA, there is a Customer 360 Fiori application. So are we better off to adapt the new capability than to convert an old Z object? So ultimately, we want to try and remove waste. From there, however, we want to analyze the objects that need to be corrected and create a plan, a level of effort on what are the objects that actually need to have the corrections done to them. And then ultimately do those corrections. Understand that, as I said, there's both pre and post steps in this process. So the tools that you might consider using are first, the tools that are going to collect and analyze information about your Z objects. So the custom code lifecycle management process provides a few tools like SCMON and the UPL process, the usage procedure logging. Probably many of you are actually even familiar with STO3, which is a monitoring tool. So a lot of these tools can help us understand what code is being used, how it's being used, and how often it's being used. Then there are tools like the SAP Code Inspector and the ABAP Test Cockpit that can assist us in doing a deeper analysis of the data. So let's take a dive into a few of those tools. So first, as a substep of the process, the first thing you're going to do is try to remove obsolete code. So we're going to use the tools of SCMON and UPL as part of your solution manager environment. So this is part of your custom code lifecycle management. And these tools can be used to monitor usage and log that usage, and then give very graphic analysis of the technical objects. So you can make information-based decisions as to whether or not the code should be passed forward or needs to be eliminated. We've included some links here that take you to various blogs that can provide more information about these tools that are worth visiting. Then ultimately, once we've decided this is the set of code that we want to really run an analysis on, you run it against the simplification database. Now I mentioned the simplification database clear back in the readiness check. So this is a tool provided by SAP that talks about changes between SAP and S/4HANA. One of those changes is code. So for example, within an SAP ECC system, there is a command char18, C-H-A-R-18, which refers to the length of the material master. So unless you're using an industry solution provided by the automotive solution, which could expand the material length number, a ECC system has a material master number that is 18 characters long. Within S/4HANA, that's actually a configurable item. So it can be either 18 or 40. But now the char18 command is no longer valid because the field may not be 18 characters long. So it's been replaced by a piece of code syntax called matnr, M-A-T-N-R. So you have to go through and actually remediate the code to make sure that it's calling the right material number. And think about how often a material number is used in a SAP environment. Certainly one of the most prolific objects in reports and in transactions. So it's a very important simplification item. And the simplification database will help you analyze any and all of those types of objects. So you run this simplification, you run these tools against the simplification database, and it will actually give you OSS notes on particular objects. Items that describe the impact and how the code needs to be adapted. It can show objects that may need to be removed from the code. So it's a very tools-based object that allows you to very quickly understand the changes that need to occur to your code. It uses the custom code inspector, which is part of the readiness check, but it can also be run independently. And it checks your repository objects. It looks at the objects regarding performance and security and syntax and even your naming conventions. It's run via T-code SCI, or you can get to it through the ABAP Workbench SE38 through the menu path program check code inspector. But ultimately, it gives you a listing of code that needs to be considered and corrected. The other tool, the ABAP Test Cockpit, is really a central infrastructure object that allows you to do code analysis as well. It specifically is good for smoothing your migration to S/4HANA. The syntax of HANA, whether it's Suite on HANA or S/4HANA, is actually different. So you really need to run these objects. The ABAP Test Cockpit is installed on your system. So let's take a look at how that happens. So there is an SAP note, a central SAP note on the setup of the ABAP Test Cockpit. You download the version and from the service marketplace and implement it. It does have to be installed on a NetWeaver environment. So if you are at a high enough NetWeaver environment, you may already have the tool on your system. If you're on a lower level version of NetWeaver, it either has to be installed on a NetWeaver environment, maybe say your solution manager system, or you'll have to upgrade to the correct NetWeaver version. Then you can run it against the simplification database. So you run the check, and that's run with the variant S4 readiness remote. And then you end up getting a listing of code that needs to be analyzed and corrected. The tool does provide what's called a quick fix option. So many of the remediations may be able to be corrected automatically by the ABAP Test Cockpit, but there will be others that will require manual intervention. So as you run it, it is simply a T-code within the system, ATC. It will provide you with a listing based on the input criteria that you provide, and then we'll give you the list of objects that you need, and we'll give you OSS notes that are relevant. So I realize it's a bit small, but on the right-hand side here, you see a screen where it's provided a list of code that needs to be addressed. And in the second from last column, you'll see some lines have an OSS note populated that should be checked. You can also, from the ABAP Test Cockpit, generate a report that gives you all those details. So it'll give you a summary findings on the types of objects, but then it gives you the listing of the actual pieces of the code that need to be considered, and if there is an OSS note available to review on how the correction should be conducted. So then you would go through the software update process, do the conversion, and do the code corrections on the S/4HANA side. So if you think about it, you can't really completely correct syntax if the syntax isn't valid. So some of these corrections have to occur as part of the post process after the conversion process, which is why we run rehearsals. We need to be able to do these corrections, capture them in transports, and apply those transports to your productive system, because we can't convert your production system and then spend 2 to 3 weeks correcting custom code. We need to be able to get those corrections into your system quickly and efficiently. So the process of running a rehearsal is paramount to the S/4HANA migration conversion process. Ultimately, then, the tools that you're using to do those corrections are tools that most ABAPers are going to be familiar with. You're still using the SPAL tool and the SPDD tool. So SPAL for things that are specifically technical objects like reports and programs and screens and function modules, and SPDD, which is more directed at your data dictionary objects. Ultimately, then, once you're converted, you do want to spend a little time doing performance tuning, make sure that the system's running effectively for you. But at this point, you've completed your custom code migration. So today, what we've hoped that you've seen is a methodology, the approach that Dickinson and Associates utilizes for a brownfield conversion from ECC to S/4HANA. And we've taken at least a examination of the readiness check, something that's done during the preparation phase of the project. The maintenance planner, which is one of the primary basis tools with the sum tool for preparing and then executing the upgrade. The customer vendor integration, which is just one of several functional simplifications that you may need to address. There are changes to other objects such as fixed assets, rebates and commissions, and the fact that material ledger is turned on. So you have to go through all of the simplifications and see how they apply to your system, but certainly the customer vendor integration is one of the major objects. And we've looked at the tools for custom code remediation. So one additional item for the group is that Dickinson Associates will be very soon publishing a series of ebooks or an ebook with a series of topics on converting from SAP ECC to S/4HANA. This will look at the brownfield approach as well as the SDT, the selective data transition approach. So look for that in the future, and hopefully it can provide some useful information to you. And with that, Alex, I think we are ready for any questions we might have.
That's correct.
Great,
Yep.
Thank you. Yep, thank you, Brad and Alex. We do have a handful of questions I'd be happy to ask you guys.
Please.
And again, if anyone, again, if any of you have other questions, please submit using the Q&A button within the Zoom application. So first question we have, I'd like to make certain I understand the concept for business partner. Are you saying that the object and tables for customer and vendor continue to exist in S4, but they become subordinate in the business partner object?
Yes, that's correct. The tables do continue to exist in S4, so you can find KNA1 and LFA1 tables, for example. But the business partner transaction code BP is the only way to create a new record in S4HANA. If you remember, there was a table with transaction codes. If you go to a transaction code that you use for customer or vendor maintenance today, it will simply redirect you to BP partner, and it will be maintained from there.
Great. Okay. Next question we have, if I upload my information for the readiness check, can other customers see it, or can I share the information with others?
Actually, that's a good question and one customers often ask. So no, within the readiness check portal, you only see information related to your system. So a competitor or a business partner of yours cannot see the information about your SAP environment. It's specific to the SIDs associated with your installation number. So as long as you haven't shared those rights with someone, they'll not be able to see it. There is an important aspect about that, however. What that means is, let's say you're going through a readiness check and you want Dickinson and Associates to look at the portal. We can't see it either. We can't see your information unless we have an appropriate S number assigned to your system. That's why there's the capability to download it to a PDF document. So if you generate a Word document, I said PDF. If you generate the Word document and the associated spreadsheets, it will contain all the information that's included in the readiness check, and that way it can be provided to Dickinson as your partner helping you through this process, but other companies cannot see your actual readiness check portal.
Thank you. Next question. During a rehearsal, do you have to do a complete data cleansing for CVI to proceed correctly? Is it a prerequisite for the sum conversion?
You want to tackle that, Alex, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So technically, no. It is possible to bypass the CVI pre-check during the sum process. However, it is not recommended. It's recommended to conduct your full CVI during the conversion process. It's clear that if you're just doing a proof of concept and you can't complete all of your data cleansing ahead of time, we can technically turn that off and avoid that check. But really, you should do at least one full rehearsal conversion in order to ensure that this works properly.
All right, just a couple more questions as we start to wrap up here. Can any of the custom code remediation be conducted prior to the conversion?
So as I mentioned, the syntax matters. A lot of the corrections will occur after the fact, but there are steps related to some of the OSS notes that are provided during the ETC check that will allow you to do some early work. So it really is a combination of activities that are occurring pre-steps, but still a lion's share of that code remediation occurs with SPAO and SPDD in the post steps.
Great, thank you. Next question we have here is, can any current SAP customer run the readiness check?
So yes, if you are current on maintenance with SAP and are at an ECC 6 environment. So I guess technically, no, not every customer can. If you are a customer who's still on a 4.6C environment, the readiness check will not work correctly on your environment. But if you are a customer who is under maintenance and at least on ECC 6 Enhancement Pack 0, you can run the readiness check. I will say that it's preferable to get to at least Enhancement Pack 5. If you're below Enhancement Pack 5, there's a number of OSS notes that have to be applied to be able to run the readiness check, where at Enhancement Pack 5, most of those things have been incorporated into your system. And ultimately, for a clean conversion, you're best off to be at Enhancement Pack 7 or 8. So don't consider those hard requirements. It can be done from ECC 6 Enhancement Pack 0, but there are additional steps that are required then. So ultimately, if you are on maintenance and on ECC 6, you can run the readiness check free of charge with SAP as part of your maintenance.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we will cover one more question before we wrap things up. Again, any questions we don't get to, we'll follow up directly. So let's see here. How about, okay. To confirm, is the use of the maintenance planner a mandatory step in the conversion process?
Yes, it is. It is part of the process to properly analyze the system. It actually feeds information into the sum. So there is an XML file that is generated that is utilized by the sum process, the software update manager that runs the actual conversion. So yes, maintenance planner is a required step in a S/4HANA conversion.
Great, thank you. Thank you both Brad and Alex and all who did. Just keep in mind that in the coming weeks, we will be releasing a short ebook on moving to S/4HANA that Brad had mentioned. So be on the lookout for that. Hopefully that'll be a useful resource for you moving forward. And we, again, thank you for joining. Hope you have a great day and a great holiday weekend coming up. Thank you all.